They were a Gnostic sect or a Gnostic group. And what they were trying to do was to live the gospel as it was, straight out of the New Testament, in its simplicity, with an emphasis on love, on caring for each other, and on being pure, not corrupt, as the Catholic Church was at that point. But I think it represents the true spirit of Christianity and also the spirit of Mary Magdalene. And so the Albigensian Crusade was declared in 1209 by Pope Innocent III. And the Inquisition was started in the early 1230s, and also with a view to eradicating Catharism. And so historically, it's a very important movement. Con lo
Deep knowledge about our true nature has probably been held by shamans, by druids and mystics since the dawn of Homo sapiens. I mean, the true nature of human consciousness, our non-physical inner essence, and its universal and divine origins. That there is no separation, that we're all sparks of the universe, created in and by love, and that we don't need any middlemen to get access to the vastness, to get in touch with the vastness of existence. That we incarnate here on earth to learn and to grow, and that masculine and feminine are just different aspects of the indivisible oneness, and that we all have both of those types of energies within us, regardless of what gender we happen to have been born into in this life. When you intuit and sense these things very strongly, they feel like knowledge, and you know that life is infinite and that the seeming limitations of this life on earth are an illusion. The finite physical life that we are conditioned to believe in is a story, a hoax, really. But the hierarchical structures, the hierarchical society that we have built needs that story, which is why the knowledge about our true nature has come across as dangerous to the ones who uphold the structure. The powers that be, they've always tried to suppress it. In recorded history, there are traditions like the Vedas of India, the teachings of Buddha, of the Essenes, of the first temple of Jerusalem, which on its destruction perhaps can be said to have migrated into Kabbalah. I don't know enough about that, but that might be one way of interpreting what happened there. Then Jesus or Yeshua came along, of course, and he likely taught in tandem with Mary Magdalene or Miriam of Magdala, and they conveyed much of the above, which to the church fathers appeared as too threatening to the materialist matrix. So they harshly edited what was to become the Bible and discarded many documents of Jesus's true teachings, of which some were rediscovered at Nag Hammadi in Egypt in 1945. The early Christians who were closest to the true message were called the Gnostics, and later this knowledge was guarded by others over the centuries, which you can learn much about from Betty Kovacs, who features in episode number 63 of the podcast Mind the Shift. One of these groups was the Cathars in southern France, who in turn were inspired by the Bogomils from Bulgaria. And as I said, there were other groups as well guarding this original true knowledge about our true essence and nature. The Cathars called themselves the true Christians, and they didn't have churches or formal hierarchies. They believed every human had a direct channel to God. Their priests were so-called perfecti, who renounced worldly wealth. Men and women were treated as equals. They believed in reincarnation. And much of this, of course, flew in the face of the Catholic Church. I recently made a little tour of the Cathar region together with my soulmate and ex-wife, Katarina. And while there, I also had the wonderful opportunity to chat once again with the Galileo Commission chair, David Lorimer, whom I interviewed in episode number 57 of the podcast. We're here in the beautiful Cathar region, and the Cathars were, of course, a group that were here maybe 800, 900 years ago, something like that, and they were persecuted, and thousands were even killed eventually in the 12th and the 13th century. They had to flee to certain towers and castles in this area here. So why were they so hated by the Catholic Church?
Well, they were a Gnostic sect or a Gnostic group. And what they were trying to do was to live the gospel as it was, straight out of the New Testament, in its simplicity, with an emphasis on love, on caring for each other, and on being pure, not corrupt, as the Catholic Church was at that point. And another important factor, and we're here in Puivert, which is one of the centers of the troubadour movement, is the fact that the Occitan culture supported equality between men and women. And so the initiates in the Catharism were both men and women, in contrast with the Catholic Church, where obviously the priests were only men and still are. Mm. And so this was a challenge from a political point of view as well as a religious, spiritual point of view, because many of the nobles in the area supported the Cathars, partly because of their purity and integrity, which they didn't see in the Catholic Church. And so the Albigensian Crusade was declared in 1209 by Pope Innocent III, and the Inquisition was started in the early 1230s, and also with a view to eradicating Catharism. And so historically, it's a very important movement. But I think it represents the true spirit of Christianity and also the spirit of Mary Magdalene, who is greatly venerated in this area.
Yeah. Yeah, you mentioned the Gnostics, and gnosis is, of course, the word for deep inner knowledge, isn't it?
It is. Yeah. It is, and it's a prolongation in a sense of faith, but it's the lived experience of faith and a lived experience of oneness with the universal mind. So they guarded, one might say, then ancient knowledge about our connection with nature and our connection with the non-physical realms also. And would you say that was knowledge that Jesus Christ himself also actually tried to convey, but which was corrupted by the church fathers later on? Yes, I would say so, because all spiritual traditions begin with the experience of the founder. And the experience that is conveyed by Jesus is a non-dual experience, a non-dual relationship of love with the universal spirit, with God. And so that's not a belief in a system or a belief in a form of salvation. It's a direct experience of the oneness of the human being with the divine source.
Yeah. And there is perhaps a connection to the also fairly well-known Knights Templar in this area?
Yes, and there are historical connections between the Cathars and the Knights Templar, and also the troubadours.
Yeah.
But they also share a culture, and there's been quite a lot written about the relationship. But my own focus is more on the spiritual component represented by the Cathars rather than the political and economic, were represented by the Templars.
Yeah, and the Cathars, they were here for a couple of hundred years, perhaps openly, and then they were persecuted and killed, and they had to move and go underground.
Yes,
literally in some cases.
Yes,
I
literally. The pivotal event was the siege of Montségur in March, over the winter 1243 to 44, and the surrender of the garrison in early March, and then the burning of 225 Cathars and sympathizers in a large field at the bottom of Montségur. That was on the 16th of March. And then some of them retreated to caves in the Ariège Valley. There were a few left in another chateau called Quérébus, which fell in 1256.
So about 500 Cathars took refuge up here on this hilltop, 1,200 meters above sea level, and the Pog itself, the so-called Pog, the hilltop, the little mountain rises about 250 meters above the rest of the environment here. So it's very steep. It's a steep walk up here, and they had dwellings around the fortification here, or the main refuge. You can't see much now because the weather is so bad. It's only 12 degrees today, end of June. But here they took refuge. And we're gonna go inside the building. Yeah, okay, so this is inside the main building, and building here. Whether this is the original or not, I'm not sure. I think that it has been built on afterwards also. But the main thing to say here is that this is the only true Cathar castle, or Cathar fortress, or Cathar place, really, among all those that are talked about, all the Cathar castles in southern France, in one sense, because this is the only one that was actually built by Cathars and for Cathars, and it was also very pivotal moment when this fell in 1244, 16th of March, because then the Cathar movement was completely dispersed and disorganized, and there were other Cathars in the region, and famously the last castle to fall was Quérébus, but that was a castle that was built for other purposes from the beginning, but some Cathars took refuge there as well. And that fell in 1255, and the last known Cathar was killed, burned at the stake in 1321, so in this area. And then there were Cathars still in northern Italy and so on, and maybe there still are.
And the last Cathar recorded to have been burnt at the stake was Guillaume de Bellibaste in 1321. So that's almost exactly 700 years ago. And he famously said that after 700 years, the laurel will turn green again.
Okay, which is a good segue over to my next question, because I want to ask you, do you think that the time has come for us now to bring forth the knowledge, the gnosis of the Cathars in our time?
Well, yes, I do, and it's also connected with the tradition that I'm a part of, which is the Peter Dönhoff tradition from Bulgaria, and because Bulgarians at that period had a movement called the Bogomils, which means dear to God, and they were also a Gnostic movement, with an emphasis on direct experience. So I do think that to the extent that modern people are interested in direct experience rather than systems of beliefs, that the time has come for more widespread appreciation of this inner spiritual path.
Yeah, the people of the Languedoc area seem to have been less spiritually choked by the edicts of the church than people elsewhere in the Catholic world. In Rennes-les-Bains, we searched for and found an ancient initiation site with female signature that David Lorimer had told us about. The chair of the devil, or rather the chair of Isis, which was called before the church twisted its history or twisted the story.
Okay, here we are at the site of the chair of the devil, as it's called locally, or rather chair of Isis, as it used to be called before the church changed the name. So this is an old cult place here in the woods. It's actually fairly difficult to get here. You have to walk through the woods along a narrow path before you get here, and it is on the the northern slopes of the Pyrenees in the Cathar region. It's unclear though whether the Cathars themselves had this site as a holy place, as an occult place, but it's probably very, very old. And you can see here the inscriptions that have been made in the on the seat of the chair here is something that the church has made to Christian it, to make it, not being held by the devil, so to speak. So this was a site for feminine wisdom and female energy, wasn't it?
It was. Definitely it was a site for the divine feminine cult. This chair is also known as the Isis chair, the chair of Isis. And it's located on the Rose line, ley line, leading up through Paris and further on, going straight through this location. And this was an initiation for feminines who wanted to take part of the female cult or the Gaia worship. You can also see it, like in the Celtic tradition, of the ribbons hanging in the trees around here, celebrating the.
There is one.
There's
Maybe
one.
you can see it. Yeah.
You can find several others
Yeah.
further away. But of course, it was called the Devil's Chair since the divine feminine cult was banned and not allowed.
Yeah. So of course the church hated this.
Mhm.
Because the divine feminine, as you say, was all about unity and non-hierarchy and all those things. So the church had to ban it.
Yes.
Perhaps the freer spirit of this region survived until later days. The village of Rennes-le-Château is a place surrounded by tales and legends about the Holy Grail, but also about worldly treasures. Much should perhaps be taken with a grain of salt, but what is true is that in the late 19th century and the early 20th century, a controversial priest by the name of Bérenger Saunière refurbished the village, its church, and a tower, among other buildings, as a celebration to the equal teachings of Jesus Christ and Mary Magdalene. So Mary Magdalene is very much revered in this village, but also generally in the whole region, actually. Saunière was convinced that he had found evidence of a bloodline from Jesus. Now, the stories about this place, they're widely known, and in the summer, busloads of visitors arrive every day in this village.
Wonderful. Now, you're the chairman of what is called the Galileo Commission, which strives to expand science beyond the materialist worldview. Is it fair to say that the Galileo Commission and other paradigm breakers are actually honoring the legacy of the Cathars among other groups?
Yes, I would say so, because interestingly, the word gnosis and the word science both mean knowledge. And so scientia is knowledge, where science is derived from the Latin word scientia. And gnosis also means to know, but it's to know in a non-dual sense, rather than knowing propositionally, that which means that you work things out logically, rather than on the basis of your direct experience. And so I think if you go back to the Hermetic axioms or the Renaissance and the idea of the anima mundi, the soul of the world, And in those days, there was a much closer relationship between science and spirituality. And this was severed by the advent of the mechanistic worldview, treating everything as machines and using this machine metaphor, which is still very, very strong in science today. And I think that's one of the things that we need to get past, to have a science more based in consciousness rather than the mechanistic idea of the human being.
So how is it going to come about, do you think? Do you foresee a kind of a battle between the materialist worldview and the people who are into gnosis more?
Well, the materialist worldview is the dominant one, not only in science but also in society. But in a sense, it's coming apart at the seams, because the economic aspect of it is leading to the destruction of nature and the destruction of ecosystems. So we can see it doesn't work in that respect. And then the spiritual, or rather the philosophical aspect, is leading to an epidemic of mental health issues through people being told by the scientific story that life is inherently meaningless. So what's the point of being here? What's the point of doing anything? What's the point of making an effort in the world?
David Lorimer, thank you so much for joining the show once again.
Thank you very much indeed. What a pleasure to be with you down in the Cathar area of France.
So this place isn't particularly spectacular when it comes to the building itself. I've seen more impressive castles, of course, but the history of spirituality is palpable here, and the energy is dense. You can feel it here.
If you like this video and other interviews and talks on Mind the Shift, please like, share, and subscribe. I appreciate all the support. And you can follow Mind the Shift on Facebook and Instagram. And you can follow me, Anders Bolling, on all the main social media and also on medium.com. Thank you.